Hello and welcome to A View from the Top. I'm Adrian Cropley. A View from the Top is a regular podcast from the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, where I interview some of the world's leading communication professionals as we explore their career journey. However, today we're doing something slightly different and we're departing from our usual format for two very special reasons. Firstly, in this episode, we're getting topical. Any communication professional working in today's world knows that diversity and inclusion is a key area of focus and one that is actually harder to navigate than we think on the surface. Our second reason for a slightly different format is that I have two very special guests who have teamed up and are making a real impact on this very topic. So we are doing comms, we're doing a comms three-way between Australia, Canada and the UK, and I mean that in the nicest possible sense. I'm so pleased that in this episode, I get to talk with the previous View from the Top guest, Priya Bates in Toronto, and welcome Advita Patel from Manchester in the UK, who I already know I want to get back and talk about her career journey in a later episode. So I'll talk her into it during this session. So let me tell you about the two of them. Priya Bates is a fellow of the International Association of Business Communicators and Strategic Communication Management Professional, and is the president and founder of Inner Strength Communication based in Toronto. She's a speaker, writer, a global influencer, all the words that you would use to describe Priya. So I'm so happy to have her on this episode, and equally excited to have Advita Patel, who is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations and the managing director of Comms Rebel. Already in that title, you know what this episode is going to be a little bit about. An internal communication employee experience consultancy based in Manchester in the UK. Advita has spoken globally about internal communication, measurement, and diversity and inclusion, and imposter syndrome. In 2020, she was named on the Northern Asia Top 100 Power List and as one of the global influencers for employee experience. Both Priya and Advita are co-founders of A Leader Like Me, which is a global membership program helping underrepresented women of colour succeed in furthering their career. So this is a great topic. I think you've got great experience as we team up with these two. So when you put these two people together, it's something special and unique, I can tell you. I could not be happier to be talking with two of the world's top internal communication professionals. And as one of the pioneers of internal comms way back when, I get so excited talking to my kin. So the three of us must do an episode together and talk about the evolution of internal communication as a discipline, and why this is now evolving into employee experience. But today, let's talk diversity. Welcome to you both, Priya and Advita.
Both happy to be here.
Thank you, Adrian.
Isn't it nice we were able to sync up these time zones?
With Adrian getting up extremely early to make that happen.
I was saying to both of you before we started our recording today, and I said it's absolute pleasure when you get to get together with very well-known influencers in the space of internal communication and employee experience. But today we're talking about diversity, and it is the hot topic. And I'd like to kind of kick off into some questions around diversity because it's such an important issue today. But how has that conversation changed in diversity, certainly over the last year? My stars, have we had some events that have kind of catapulted this to the headlines? So how has the conversation changed over the last year?
Well, I think, Adrian, we all know that with the death of George Floyd, there were the reaction to that were the global protests that happen around the world. And it was really interesting to see something that's been going on for a long time, not only in the US, but throughout the world in terms of anti-Black racism, come to light because of that video. And that video said to people, this is not right. This is not, we can't keep doing things like that and turning a blind eye, and something must be done. And what amazed me during that time period was the fact that it wasn't just US protests. People took accountability, and they were aware around the world. There was a little bit of trendiness to it, And I think we had a lot of conversations around that, a lot of performative gestures by organizations, associations, and individuals. But what we've seen since is an attention to diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging that I don't think we've ever seen in our lifetime. Would you agree, Advita?
Definitely. I think, definitely in the last year or so. And one thing I want to kind of remind the listeners today is that diversity, equity, and inclusion has been around much longer than the last 12 months. We have been talking about this topic for a long, long time. And I would say this is the first year in the last 12 months we've had people reaching out to both Priya and I to ask questions and understand a little bit more about it and show a genuine interest in what they can do to make a difference. And I think that is what's going to trigger some of the changes. And I think that's why the last 12 months have been quite special when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly around race relations.
And it's brought it to the world's attention, and quite often it takes these events that kind of springboard the issues. But as you were saying, Priya, that it's kind of catapulted the issue of the diversity forward, and what started with an issue of color, but it's now far beyond that, isn't it? It's digging into areas of diversity on all levels.
And it's empowering the communities that have traditionally been quiet and accepted the systems that we lived in. And the one thing that I say all the time, Adrian, as a South Asian woman of color who was an immigrant in Canada, I have looked at my own behaviors. I have looked at my own biases. It's become more personal, not only from a lens of being a diverse person, in the organizations and in the world and in the country that I live in, but also from the lens of where have my biases, what have I learned, and what are the things that I need to personally unlearn to make sure that we create a more equitable world.
And this area of bias, Avita, I think, I was watching an episode, was it Comms Hero, that the two of you did, and that issue of bias comes up, and there's a lot of that unconscious bias that's happening within organization. And we all do it. We are all guilty, I'm sure, at some stages of being influenced by what our upbringing, the things that we're just not completely aware of. So how come bias are we becoming more aware of that, Advita?
Yeah, I would say so. And you know what, Adrian, as human beings, we are biased. That's just the way we are. We always align with folks who who believe in the same things that we believe in, who sometimes look like us, who we can have really good conversations with. And there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me, please don't think that there's anything wrong with that kind of side of things. But when bias becomes a problem is when it starts discriminating against others. And people in power tend to, or the decision makers rather as well, tend to always pick the people that they are comfortable with. Because people like to be comfortable. People don't like the uncomfortable. People don't like talking to folks who don't align with their kind of viewpoints, and you will, as Priya quite clearly said, Priya and I both of us have been through a learning ourselves in terms of our own bias, because we have them. We all have those biases, and it's really important as individuals, as we kind of understand, learn, and educate the kind of things that are around us at the time, that we check in with us bias. So one area of work that I have been focusing on is around LGBTQ plus matters and non-binary and what that means, because we had somebody on our program who came out as non-binary, and that was something that I definitely was not familiar with. It wasn't a world that I belonged to, but I went out, I tried to understand a little bit more about it, educated myself and asked the questions. And I think that's all we kind of ask of people, is ask questions, try and understand, and don't fear failing, because failure is what is going to help you grow and learn and develop, and hopefully help others grow and develop. And that's why I always say to everybody, check in with your bias. Look at the if you're doing a conference, I know we're going to get onto this in a bit, but if you're planning a conference, then have a look at the speaker lineup. Do you have representation of people that you're targeting that conference at? Do your speakers, are they bringing something different to the table? And if you're not sure, then get somebody else outside of your network to help you and check in with that. And that's all we can ask. And you have to be really conscious of it as well, which can be difficult, especially when we talk about unconscious bias as well.
Look, and that area of unconscious bias is really it's a big one, and I really love the advice of keeping check on your own biases, because being called out for it is one thing, and we all get kind of defensive when we're called out because we don't believe that's what we're doing. But it is the more I guess that we can educate ourselves to go, let's just stop and think for a moment. So let's talk about that conference. Let's get a little bit edgy. Tell me about the call out to conference planners for the lack of diversity in conferences. How has that come about, and what is it that you've done to call that out? And how was the reaction? and has it driven change?
Well, how was the reaction, Priya? That's a good question. Let's just say the reaction wasn't, great. People were very fragile when we raised it. So this all started when I was about beginning of January. So let's even talk. We're talking about the last 2 months, right? So 2021, the last 2 months. Yeah. So in January, I came across a conference that was being hosted by an organization who had 35 speakers on their lineup. And the reason I tuned into this one in particular, because it was going to be held in person in Manchester, so that the city that I'm from, and they decided to make it virtual, obviously with everything that's happening with COVID. So that's one of the reasons it was on my radar, to be honest with you. Yeah. So when I saw the picture, and it's always the imagery, Adrian, by the way, that kind of triggers the reaction, I think, at times for me. When I saw the image and it was 35 speakers, there was not one visible diverse person on that list. No. I'm talking about color, because I don't know about, that's the only thing we can actually look at, when you're looking at images, to be honest. There was not even the token gesture that you often get, right? And I was a bit like, this is ridiculous. How can in 2021, in everything that we have spoken about, Priya and I in particular, over the last 6 to 9 months, around diversity and around the speakers, the women we had celebrated on our program, many of them communicators, how can this conference not even look at that picture that they've created and curated and all that, and think to themselves, there's something wrong here? There's something not quite right here. So, there's a reason my business is called Comms Rebel, Adrian, to be honest. And I am a rebel. I love it. And let's remember, I am in a privileged position to call out these things, because I do have a really strong community of supporters. I know Priya has got my back as well with the stuff that we do with a leader like me. So I am not, I work for myself as well. So I'm in a privileged position to kind of go out publicly and say, this isn't on. What are you doing about this? Yeah. And people reacted as I expected. Not in it, they'd liked it and they retweeted it and they said, oh, they must do better. But it was almost tumbleweed. I had a few likes and I had a few retweets and I had a few people DM me privately to say that this isn't on and this shouldn't be happening, but not publicly. So that in itself is, interesting, if you look at the psychology of behavior. And then
I was going to say, isn't that an interesting behavior to get? That.
Yeah, it is.
It's very radio silence. It's crickets, Adrian. It's absolutely incredible, because all the other content we get, and especially Advita, probably more than me on Twitter and me on LinkedIn, get a lot of engagement on our posts and other things that we talk about when we're talking about internal communication or engagement. But when we are calling out from a diversity perspective, people are very afraid. And then there's a lot of behind the scenes, and they're afraid on both sides. Afraid as the speakers and the dominant culture who is benefiting, but afraid, we see a lot of fear from other people of color who tell us behind the scenes, I wish I could speak up. I wish I could support you in public, but I'm too afraid. And what does that say about our industry? These are communication conferences. This is
Yeah.
internal communication.
Yeah.
This is our culture. What does that say to us as a profession that are people that are afraid to say anything?
Yeah.
Like that hurts me.
Yeah,
It really does.
when we should be the ones that are having the opinion, driving the agenda, creating the conversations. Absolutely.
Yeah, we should be the leading light. We play such a role in some organizations that we work in. We have the umbrella view of an organization, and as a profession, I feel like majority of internal communicators are quite empathetic. It's a reason we get into this profession, right? We care. We want to make sure our people that we work with are communicated effectively. They understand what they're there to do, so they can help the organization perform and deliver against the objectives. And we're lucky in a sense in some of the roles that we have in organizations that we know and we can hear what people are saying. So we hold the pen on some of the content that we share in the business well. And we're transitioning, and we said just offline, didn't we, Adrian, that we are transitioning to employee experience a little bit from internal comms. And gone are the days where we were, I know it does exist for some folks, but we are transitioning into that more strategic advisor guidance, sharing our insights with our leadership team, giving them help and support and helping them understand some of the language barriers and some of the languages and especially inclusive language, which can make people stop and not want to ask the questions because they are scared of getting it wrong.
And it's interesting. There was an example the other day when I was working with one of my clients, and just the whole post-COVID returning to an office messaging. And I remember saying to a client, he says, "I'll be glad when everybody's back at work." And I said, "Nobody's stopped working. You mean you'll be glad when people are back into the office?" Yeah, but you know what I mean? No, it's very, very subtle in the languaging. Yeah. And so this is where, in this, the issue of diversity is having check on language that we use that is inclusive.
Absolutely. And I know that Advita with CIPR, because she's very involved in CIPR, had a study that was done. Was it a year ago? It was released, Advita, that in the UK, 92% of professionals identify as white, and it's a very small percentage in a very multicultural country that are actually in communication who are non-white.
Yeah.
And I know we're doing a similar study here in Canada that I'm waiting with bated breath to hear the results of.
Yeah. It's interesting to get those perspectives too of the, and I remember years ago, when you go and speak in different countries and suddenly you're elevated because you're white and male. And I will share with this because this will upset both of you, that there was a time I was in London, and this is going way, way, way back, probably 20, 25 years. And we were running one of the very first internal communications training programs, and it was an immersion program. And we had internal communication professionals from around the world. One of the things that we did is we went out to big organizations and basically interviewed them on their perspective on what internal comms was at the time, because it was not at all established. And I remember there was a group of us went to, I'm not sure I should name the organization, but we went to a large consulting organization. And there were 7 of us in the room. I was the only male. All the others were female, and it was a male executive. And it didn't matter who asked the question, he replied to me. And it was, I started shifting myself in the room, so I was less in direct line of sight, and he literally kept turning his head to every time there's a question, he'd defer that back to me. And I thought, I don't know whether that infuriates you when you hear things like that, but we see that kind of thing happen, not just on sex, but on color, on somebody that's got tattoos.
And we think about the fact that what are we missing?
Yeah.
So that's what I think about as internal communication professionals, and even HR is very similar to us. When we're providing advice, and counsel to our leaders and our organizations. On the ground level of those organizations, there's tremendous diversity.
Yeah.
In the communities of those organizations, there's tremendous diversity. In the customer base of that organization, there's tremendous diversity, but the decision makers have a very narrow lens.
Yeah.
And you think about, what are we missing? What are we losing when we don't embrace the diversity and hear those perspectives?
When we see studies like the Edwin Trust Barometer, and we've always, no matter how many years that we've looked at the barometer, we know that people trust someone like me. There's that reflecting who I am as the person that I trust. So of course, in diversity, you're looking not at like-minded or like-looking people, but these, again, going back to the biases, start coming into play. But there was the study from Gallagher, The State of the Sector, that identified diversity and inclusion as the number 2 priority after mental health and well-being. And you looked at the role of internal communications. What is the role of internal communications within organizations, given that this is the number 2 issue?
Well, for me, like I said before, Adrian, it's about what are we doing to support like we said, the power of language is really important, and we have a part to play in that. And most of this is down to education, understanding, making sure that we are being as inclusive as we can in the conversations that we're holding, and also asking the questions of our leaders. We're savvy as an industry of communicators, and we have got some folks have got the skill set to ask the questions of their leadership team, to say, what are we doing about this diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is it? I fear it's a tick box exercise, and I'm not going to sit here and on my preach to everybody and say this, because I know it can be challenging, and it's our responsibility as a human being, and also as an internal communicator, to learn about the people who we are serving in our organization. No, I just said, as Priya said, the operations level and the operative levels and the middle management level, even, it's pretty diverse, I would say, in some organizations. Others not so much, but in the larger ones, you would see there's a more diversity than top anyway. And the question to kind of consider at this point is, like, as Priya said, what's going on? And it's not, don't get me wrong, and I've blogged about this previously. The role of diversity doesn't just lie with one individual. It's not internal comms' responsibility. It's not HR's responsibility. It doesn't lie with one person or one specific department. It's everybody's responsibility. But you do need to get that ball rolling. And it does have to, in my opinion, it does have to come from the leaders in the organization, who have to lead by example. You have to stop the things like, having meetings on the golf course, for example.
Yes.
And think it's those little things, golf courses and Monday night footballs, where they have those business meetings, and that in itself is exclusive, right? And not everybody can go along to a golf course, or not everybody can play. I'm not saying there are women out there who do play golf and do play football and all that, but generally, and if we're talking generally in an organization, you're definitely not going to see many women of color, put it that way, on a golf course. Playing stuff like that. So,
and it's interesting you talk about the analogy of golf. I remember, when I was starting to move up in an organization, one of my biggest fears is that I'm going to be looked at differently because I can't go out and play golf with this, because I have no interest whatsoever in doing that. And that's even as a man within an organization, look, albeit a gay man in an organization trying to climb the corporate ladder, the biggest fear was, oh my God, I'm not going to make it with this executive team, because they are all golfers and all male and white and middle-aged.
and that's what drives imposter syndrome, and that's exactly the reason we feel like frauds, and we feel like we don't belong, and we say things like, oh, I'm lucky to be even given this position, because I don't see anybody else like me in this room, but yet here I am, so I must be very lucky to have this opportunity. And there's this whole debate at the moment around imposter syndrome, and people say it's a bit of a buzzword, and it's a the word of whatever, and people use it as an excuse and all that. But there's some, the research has been done and it does exist. And sometimes we put the onus on the individual to sort out and sort themselves out. But ultimately, it's the organization that makes you feel excluded, which is why you feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
So those folks who feel like imposters, like you just said, Adrian, you can't play golf.
Yeah.
And your leaders and executives were making decisions and hiring folks on the golf course. And all of a sudden you kind of think to yourself, do I even belong here?
Yeah.
Am I ever going to be on that table with them? Because I can't hold a golf court, a golf stick. Is it stick? What is it? I don't really know.
Hey, we might have to look it up.
Don't even know.
That says everything you need to know about me and golf.
Exactly. When you can't have the conversation about golf, you suddenly go,
It's called a club, Advita.
Oh, that was it. Yeah.
Thank you, Priya.
And I thought the club was the thing you did at the end of golf when you went and had a few drinks. That's the clubhouse.
That's funny. I would probably add to, Adrian, when you think of what can I see, can internal communication professionals do?
Yes.
Think beyond the performance and think about the performative gestures and the words, but actually think about the actions. And that's something that we're saying to executives across the board. We can't just simply, check boxes and put out statements. And that's what we saw a lot throughout the last year. We first saw the statements and the hashtags. We saw that then followed by, donations to charities. We're starting to see some organizations start looking at suppliers. How do we bring in, if we don't have people in our organizations, how do we bring different thought leaders and different perspectives in? I think there's an opportunity to listen to your people. Focus groups, we've both done a lot of focus groups, Adrian. The gold is in what you hear from the people at the grassroots and the ground level and your customers. And at least if that perspective's not at the top, you can provide that point of view as a communication professional because you're truly, truly listening and asking the questions on what change looks like. And then when you're advising those executives, the clear thing that I realize is this is not going away. I was pleased that it showed up on the Gallagher survey as the second priority. It's because we're seeing some real action plans now from those leaders, the leading organizations. They're really what you're seeing about, like Netflix is making big movements and they're changing how they do business. This is not just about, putting out nice statements. They're changing the way they hire. They're changing the way they recruit. They're changing the way they make decisions. They're changing the programming that they're providing. That's what we're going to see from leaders. And the question for me, for communication professionals and organizations is, are you going to be a leader or are you going to be a follower when you feel you're forced to be? I think you need to make that decision.
There's only advantage in having diverse workforces. The diversity of opinion types, thoughts, experiences is just such a rich thing for organizations. And it'll be really interesting as we continue to evolve our maturity in this area of diversity inclusion to then start looking at the measures around how this benefits organizations. Because we know organizations, for years that you hire the same the cookie cutter, the same people into the organization that fit this exact mold. That diversity means that you do not achieve everything you want to achieve as an organization. So I'm going to be really excited when we start making some of those connections. Now, what I wanted to do is, and you've taken me there, Priya, in talking about what we need to do as a profession. And before we get off that topic, how tough do we need to start getting with our executives? And let's look at that as a leading question, right? Because I have a particular opinion that we are starting to have a much stronger voice as internal communication professionals. But I think it's one of the gaps that we have within our profession of saying we really do need to stand up and call it out.
And I think we should
Definitely.
do that across the board, right, Adrian? Like,
Yeah.
we're not just talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging here. We're talking about, walking the talk
Yeah.
from an organizational perspective. And do you have the ear of the leaders in your organization? Because that's what we all aspire
Yeah.
to do and be. We've talked about that seat, the magical seat at the table for our entire career.
Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh, I've started with this one.
And what that means, I say this, and I think I said this on when I did my last podcast with you, is that our challenges are not about capability and capacity. They are about courage and confidence. And that's the thick skin you need to develop across a number of, it's not just in one area, across all of the advice that you provide, holding our leaders and holding our organizations accountable for all the right reasons, because they will impact bottom line, because it will increase innovation, because it will protect brand and reputation, right? Things that matter to those leaders.
Perfect.
Sorry, Adrian, I was just going to add, about this seat at the board, I'm a little bit tired about people using that as an excuse sometimes about not having that seat, which is why they can't, influence decisions. And my kind of counter argument back to that is always, it's not about having the physical seat, it's about how much you influence in that business, right? You could be a comms officer, you could be a comms assistant, you could be a director of comms. For me, job titles don't add much value, in my opinion, to be honest with you, because I've met some incredible comms officer, operative level people who are making great traction and influencing really well because of their knowledge and their confidence and the way they work. And I've met some not so great director of comms who don't have influence and who are, struggling to get the respect and get the traction. So job titles to me don't really add any value in that sense. But a big part of you as an individual standing up to those leaders, I acknowledge that it can be tough if you don't have the confidence, but confidence is always kind of balanced out with credibility and then your knowledge. And I always say to people who work in out the roles that we work in comms is armor yourself with this knowledge, right? Don't just look at the micro level, go macro, go look around the industry, connect and build your community. So you are going into these conversations well informed. And that's when that confidence is pushing you to have that conversation with your leader. The reason people step away from those conversations is because they don't really know. And you kind of gut feeling, but we all know, all of us have worked with senior leaders in our careers. They have, they're business savvy, and it's always about the bottom line with them to an extent. And if you talk in their language and you present the data and the stats and the information and the knowledge and case studies about why it's so important for them to pay attention to various, as Priya said, wider than diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but other areas, then all of a sudden they'll sit up and listen. And a very tactical example for me is I struggled with finance, right? Finance was not my forte. So I went and undertook a finance for non-finance managers program, a course. So I could actually sit around that table with the management team and contribute to the conversation rather than sitting there head down and just nodding along and taking on the task rather than contributing. And that's a very practical example, but there's so many things that we could do as a communicator to enhance our confidence, to have those courageous conversations with our leadership team.
I think you're giving some amazing tips for communication professionals on how to practically win with these executives, because it is all about influence. It's I often say don't back them into a corner that they can't get out of. Learn to influence and know that your role as an internal communication professional is about developing your leaders' capabilities. So you've got to be the mentor, the coach, the person that's got the information, and as you say, talk their language, learn the language of the executive to be able to communicate with them and influence them.
Totally. So that's the reason I became a coach. So I got a qualified coach because I knew coaching them was the best way to do that, right? You never want to throw your leader under the bus, right? And that's really important. And
as a last resort,
I
was saying as a last resort, tell them what the competitor is doing.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Priya, I was so saying the last resort was throw them under the bus. I mean, and we've
I
all
know.
been tempted. I know we've all been tempted.
No, the opposite. It's what's amazing to me is leaders who've gotten to those high positions love competition.
Yes.
And when they hear that other organizations, what's happening, what's the norm, what do other organizations do, they then say, why can't I be there too? Because I want to be the best.
Yeah.
So I use that as much as possible as well.
I look and tell you, and now what I want to do is I want to get on to your conference. So I know that you are running a Diversity in Action conference next month. Actually, it's almost here.
Yeah.
It's the end of February now.
Yeah, 23rd of March.
Fantastic. So tell me a little bit about the conference and what people will expect from that conference. And we're going to encourage everybody to attend that conference. So tell me a little bit about it.
The conference is called Diversity in Action. It's our second conference in the diversity and part of A Leader Like Me. When we launched A Leader Like Me, which is a program right now for women of color, we plan to expand to other groups later this year. But really think about how we create that courage and confidence in the groups that are underrepresented, especially at a time where there's opportunity. But we also wanted to ensure that the conversation on diversity didn't go away. So we started with diversity in PR in October, and our follow-on, thinking that we're getting to a year after the George Floyd murder and protests, we wanted to think about what's actually happened from an action perspective. And so we've brought together a great lineup of speakers. I'll let Advita tell you a little bit about them. And we've made the price point extremely accessible, because this is really about getting communication professionals and all other professionals. There's some really varied perspectives here. Really listening and hearing what the conversations from a first person perspective, not the DEI champions or somebody who studied it. This is what it means to me as a person in a community, and here's my perspective and here's my expertise. And it's not that hard to find that expertise. That's what's kind of exciting when we're putting together this lineup. The lineup is absolutely fabulous. Advita, do you want to tell them a little bit about that lineup?
Please do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, so as Priya said, we have specifically picked speakers, who have got lived experiences, and that was very important to us. So we've got Dr. Anita Sanchez, who is an Indigenous woman, an incredible woman, who's going to be talking about Indigenous leadership and wisdom of the Indigenous people, and how leaders can embrace that and use it to become better leaders in the work that they do. And that I can't honestly wait. We don't have an Indigenous population in the UK, so just hearing about this culture as well is going to be fascinating. Then we've got Dr. Lino, who's going to be talking about anti-racist organisations and how to build them and what it actually means. We've got Jade Pritchett, who's going to be talking about allyship and what it actually means to be a true ally. And that's going to be an absolutely amazing session as well, because I do think with allyship, people say they're an ally, but then what do they actually do to contribute to allies? So what actions are they taking? So Jade is going to be talking a little bit about that. We've got the wonderful Adina White, and Adina is actually a founding member of A Leader Like Me community. And Adina has got an amazing podcast, Black Belt Voices, where she shares the stories of the southern states of America's Black people whose stories have been forgotten, and she's brought them alive. And she was mentioned in Vanity Fair magazine and Oprah's magazine, and an incredible woman who has got a lot to share, and she's going to be talking about storytelling. And then we've got a couple of panels. We've got a disability, Beyond My Disability panel, which is led by a wonderful guy called Mark Webb. And then we've got the leader at the top, which is a CEO panel. Now, I have to say, Adrian, on this CEO panel, this is the one where we have had a challenge in finding a leader of colour who is a CEO in an organisation, a multinational organisation, or just an organisation. And this is where Priya and I actually are going to call this out a little bit and have a conversation about why are we struggling, bearing in mind that Priya and I have got pretty wide networks. This is the one area that we are struggling to find that CEO lead. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, what that means. We've got some amazing CEOs on the panel who are going to talk about what they are doing to support diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And it's going to be a really, really good conversation. And amongst all of that, we're going to have networking, some, safe conversations. And that's really important to both Priya and me in terms of creating a space, because this conference is for allies and sponsors. This conference are for the white folks, let's just say it, and the privileged folks who are struggling to understand what they can do to help.
Yeah.
They want to know, what can I do? How can I get in there? How can I learn more? So this is for them. This is for those people who want to be out there and support and understand, learn and educate and be the champions and sponsors of others and understand what other areas of work they need to get involved in as well. So that's why we put in so much time and energy into this conference and make it accessible, because we don't want anyone to struggle. With budget, for me, and price barrier should never be a reason not to attend something, in my view. And it's virtual, so it's on demand. I know for the Australian audience, it might be a bit later on in the day, but all the videos are available on demand, so you can watch back at your leisure for as long as you like, to an extent. And we're going to have a little community where people can ask questions and not fear being scared of asking us questions either.
And I think it's great to have a safe environment in which people can actually ask questions, because it's, this is not about, shaming people and into you're not being diverse enough. It's actually going, go in with an inquiring mind. I suspect, the way that you're talking. Learn. Yeah. Participate.
Expand your network.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we love about the platform that we use, which is Hopin, is it's got this kind of speed dating type, speed networking functionality, where in our breaks, it just randomly, you can select to randomly connect with somebody for 5 minutes who's attending the conference. And that's the thing that during our last conference, people loved the most.
Yeah. And isn't it nice that for a diversity and inclusion conference, you are well and truly including everyone, being online and being available to anybody around the world. So I really recommend people jump in. How much is it?
Canadian dollars, which means almost free. $149 is the cost for the full day conference.
Oh, wow.
That's $149.
That's good. So
the worse the Canadian dollar does, the better better deal you'll have.
Well, we're really pleased because we're almost on par in Australia. So
that's right.
It's much better it's in Canadian dollars than American dollars.
That's correct.
Excellent. So how can people register? Is a website? We can put this on our screen.
They can. Sorry, Adrian. Yes, I was just going to say, there's a website, so aleaderlikeme.com /diversity in action, or you can follow us on our social feeds, and we're continuously sharing the link on there. And obviously, we'll share the link with you, Adrian, to add to your show notes, or so people can access it pretty easy. But Priya and I, you can find us both on Twitter and on LinkedIn. DM us if you can't find what you're looking for, and we'll send you the link as well directly.
Oh,
and the one thing, I think one thing that communication professionals, HR professionals, leaders can think of is we've got this incredible content, a full day of content with these incredible experts. And once you have that in re-record for a year, that could become learning for your teams. And you're able to share that information, right? So in your organizations, once we're back in the same place, or if you're sharing your screen on Zoom, there may be an opportunity to use that information as lunch and learns as well, especially on a topic that's very topical and timely right now.
And this is why I really wanted to talk to the two of you, because for us here at the centre, this is a learning opportunity, and I really want to appeal to people to. Here is a great opportunity to learn from the experts, get involved with the conversation, and as you said, share this stuff, because it's really about building the capacity within organizations. Listen, absolutely, I am so pleased that we were able to connect and do this episode today. So let me thank both of you for not just what you're doing for the profession, but for joining me today and sharing your passion in this area of diversity and inclusion.
Well, thanks for having us, Adrian. We really, really appreciate your support.
Thank you,
Great.
Adrian.
And look, and it's been my pleasure to host you. So everybody go to the conference. Absolutely worthwhile. 23rd of March. Please join in. Let me thank you both again for joining me with A View from the Top. That's it for this week's or this episode of A View from the Top. Look forward to everyone joining us next time on A View from the Top.